You're not burying anything until I see a permit. Sharon Vosberg, president of our HOA board, stood there in 4-inch heels and a suede blazer, snapping photos of the urn in my hands like it was a code violation. Behind her, her silver SUV idled over the exact plot I'd spent weeks preparing, the soil packed, the roots cleared, the hexstone I carved myself half submerged beneath her tires. HOA Code 9B, she said, flicking her phone. No unapproved fixtures on communal greenbelt. I didn't speak, not yet. I just looked up at her, then pointed to the drone hovering above us, its lens blinking red. Live streaming, I said. County timestamp. Heritage server. You just parked on a registered burial site. She blinked. So, before we go further, subscribe. Because what this woman did next, you're going to want every frame of it on record. My name is Dr. Lennox Marston. I'm a forensic archaeologist by profession, tenured for 15 years at Midridge State, published on over 60 zoning disputes involving burial rights and historical easements. I've testified in 4 state courtrooms and 3 preservation commissions. But today, I'm not a professor. I'm a father. And that ground beneath her SUV, that was where my son asked to rest. Mycan was 17 when the doctors told us. Stage 4, rapid spread, weeks, not months. We didn't go to war with the diagnosis. He didn't want that. He wanted stories and walks and music. And he wanted to be buried at the hexstone, an old 6-sided marker my grandfather showed me as a boy. Our ancestors were buried there before this community was ever built. It took me 3 months to trace the survey data, get the preservation papers certified, and file the ecological urn request through the county. Not HOA, county. Hearthvale Bluffs didn't exist when the hexstone first marked land. Their bylaws don't reach here. I made sure of that. But Sharon didn't care. She saw my son's service, just a quiet circle of mourners, no sound system, no tent, no flowers. As a disruption, no permit, no pre-approval, no conformity. Her car crept into the lot before we even lowered the urn. She got out mid-hymn and started taking pictures. You don't have authority here, I said again. She smiled. I have aesthetics. I was still kneeling when her front tire touched the edge of the hexstone. I heard the scrape, stone on rubber, like a whisper from the past. The guests froze. No one moved. Mikan's urn was in my hands, and the earth was ready. And she was parked on his grave. This is an active violation, she said, louder now, stepping forward as though reading from a script. Unpermitted burial activity, non-compliant fixture. I'll need to issue a citation and begin removal proceedings. That's when I finally stood. You touch this ground again, I said, and you won't be dealing with me. You'll be dealing with the state attorney's office and the Historical Easement Commission. She tilted her head like she didn't believe me. I already filed the coordinates, I added. The zoning overlay is protected under Heritage Clause 42C. You just desecrated a pre-charter burial marker. And that, I pointed at her SUV, is going to cost you 10 years. For the first time, her smile faded. She looked around like she was seeing the other mourners for the first time. And the drone, still blinking red, caught it all. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Because I knew what she didn't. I knew that the moment her tire hit the hexstone, she crossed a line not even the HOA could paint over. By the next morning, the violation notice was already taped to my door. White paper, black font, generic header. Nothing personal, except for the accusation. Unauthorized landscaping activity. Immediate compliance required. That was their term for it. Landscaping. There was no mention of my son. No mention of the urn. Just bullet points about unapproved topographical changes and visual disharmony in shared spaces. At the bottom, Sharon had initialed it in looping blue ink. The audacity wasn't new. Hearthvale Bluffs had a reputation. I'd been warned when we moved in, but McCann wanted peace in his final months, not fences or fights. I thought I could keep us below their radar. We weren't the type to host loud barbecues or paint our trim bright colors. I'd chosen the lot because it backed onto what the HOA referred to as undeveloped greenbelt. But I knew what it was. What they called greenbelt was originally marked in the 1937 municipal overlay as sacred cultural territory. That hexstone wasn't decorative. It was a waypoint for an entire generational map. a territory my great-great-grandfather carved by hand and passed down through state-recognized deed clauses that predated the HOA's founding by 82 years. The day after the burial, I returned to the site at sunrise. The grass was trampled, her tire tracks still coiled like scars around the hex-stone. I knelt again, not to pray but to document. I shot stills from 7 angles, logged GPS coordinates into my preservation app. My drone flew 2 perimeter loops, archiving thermal and topographic footage, all of it backed up in real time to 3 separate storage services. It wasn't over, not even close. Mid-morning, 2 uniformed community compliance officers showed up, badges that looked official if you squinted. They stood on the sidewalk and read from a laminated script, saying I was now under temporary landscaping injunction. I told them to step back, off the easement, and that they were trespassing on protected historical land. One of them, a younger guy with a name tag that read Ty, looked unsure. The other, older, said flatly, "We've been told this is common area. The HOA has jurisdiction." "No," I said, holding out a printed overlay. "This is parcel X14H. It's a sovereign easement bound to public preservation. It's not common area, and your employer's bylaws stop at that red line." The younger one blinked. The older one said they'd need to check with Sharon. They left without another word. By noon, Sharon had posted in the community app. A blurry photo of the hexstone appeared beside a caption, "Unauthorized landscaping project, creating safety hazard near lot 212. Board reviewing removal protocols." Comments poured in. Most were silent emoji reacts, but a few spoke up. "Isn't that where the burial was?" one asked. "Thought I saw a service there yesterday. That was for his son, right?" Then someone posted a screenshot from my drone feed. The still image of Sharon's SUV parked across the marker, the hood cutting the shot in half like a guillotine. There was no commentary, just the image, and that was enough. They started deleting posts after that. The HOA app went into moderation mode, which meant only board-approved messages could appear. My access was restricted. The burial violation stayed pinned to the top of the feed. Later that day, I watched 2 gardeners with HOA uniforms slowly approach the burial site. They stood awkwardly at the edge, glancing toward the house. I stepped onto the back porch and waited. One of them waved, not in greeting, but in surrender, and they left without touching anything. Even now, it wasn't grief that kept me awake. It was calculation. This wasn't a misstep. This was a campaign. Sharon didn't care about property lines or legal overlays. She wanted control. Uniform hedges, tidy blocks, no hexstones, no history, no graves. But I wasn't a grieving parent lost in fog. I was the one man in that neighborhood who knew every line of every ordinance they thought they owned, and every clause that trumped them. And now, the moment her tire touched sacred ground, she'd given me something else: jurisdiction. The next board meeting was closed to non-members, but I went anyway. They held it at the Hearthvale Ridge Clubhouse, that sterile beige structure at the edge of the community with too much granite and no soul. As I stepped inside, the smell of citrus cleaner and fresh printed agendas hit me. The chairs were arranged in a tight circle, every seat occupied by the familiar faces of our pristine little empire. And there she was, Sharon Vosberg, seated dead center in a red blazer like a warning light. 2 empty coffee cups beside her, a tablet in her lap, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I stayed in the back, arms crossed, silent. They noticed me halfway through the budget section, someone whispered. A woman to Sharon's left, Mara, I think, leaned in and muttered something, then glanced at me like I'd tracked mud onto her carpet. Sharon tapped her pen against the table. "Dr. Marston," she said smoothly without looking. "As a reminder, this is a closed session. If you'd like to submit a concern, the board will review it at our next open meeting." I didn't move. Her eyes finally met mine. "Is there something you're unclear about?" That was when he spoke. "I think he should stay." Every head turned. Daryl Wintley, HOA Vice Treasurer, hadn't looked up all night, but now he was staring directly at Sharon, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Sharon blinked. "Excuse me?" Daryl cleared his throat. "He's a homeowner. His property backs up to the disputed section. If the board's discussing action near his lot, he has a right to hear it." There was a long silence, the kind that makes people forget to breathe. Even I didn't expect it. Sharon's voice was clipped. "We aren't taking action. We're reviewing complaints regarding a non-compliant structure in the Greenbelt." "You mean the grave," Daryl said, still calm. "Please use the term listed in the agenda," she snapped. "Unpermitted structure." But Darrow didn't look away, and neither did I. She waved a hand like she was swatting away a fly. "Fine, stay. But you're not to speak or interrupt." The meeting dragged on, but the tone had shifted. Sharon's voice stayed in control, but she watched her words now. She didn't mention the SUV, didn't reference the drone footage, but I caught the phrasing, mitigation options, land restoration, legal gray zone. And when the meeting finally ended, chairs scraping back, I saw Darrow linger. He didn't come to me right away. He waited until the room was nearly empty, then approached like someone stepping onto thin ice. "I didn't expect you to say that," I said quietly. He exhaled. "Neither did I." Up close, Darrow looked older than I remembered. His beard had gone mostly gray, and the crow's feet at his eyes didn't match the polished board photo that hung in the clubhouse lobby. He glanced around, then spoke lower. "I saw the plans, Lennox. Back when they were first drawing the community boundary, the hex stone was on the overlay. You helped design them, didn't you?" "I was fresh out of licensing," he nodded. "Worked with the developer. We were told not to worry about the old easement data, that it would get absorbed once the HOA was ratified." "Did you know they paved over graves?" His face tightened. "I suspected." A pause. "I have copies of the original CAD files," he said finally. "The ones with the unedited overlays. I never deleted them." I stared at him, unsure if it was hope or fury building in my chest. "Why are you telling me this now?" He looked away. "Because I watched her drive onto that grave like it was a parking lot. And I did nothing." Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a thumb drive. "This has the zoning files, original blueprints, surveyor notes, all before the HOA redrew the property line." I took it without a word. As he turned to leave, he said over his shoulder, "This community wasn't built to erase the past, but Sharon's determined to pretend it never existed." And just like that, the first crack had opened in the board. 2 days later, the orange fencing went up. Not around the clubhouse, not around the HOA office, around the hex stone. It appeared sometime after midnight, a bright plastic perimeter stretching across the grass like a net. 4 heavy-duty steel poles at each corner, zip-tied mesh pulled taut, the kind they use for pool repairs or sidewalk collapses. Except, this wasn't a hazard. This was a grave. The sign staked into the dirt read, "Area closed, pending compliance review." In smaller print beneath, "Violators subject to fine." I stood in silence, my coffee untouched in one hand. The sunrise cast long shadows across the mesh, warping its outline, making it look even more grotesque than it already was. It wasn't just disrespect. It was a message. A public display meant to humiliate, to remind the community who made the rules here. By noon, it had already done its work. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers. A woman walking her dog paused across the street, gave me a half-hearted wave, and quickly moved on. Another couple veered to the opposite sidewalk. No one asked questions, no one offered condolences. The worst part was the silence. That afternoon, I checked the HOA portal. Sharon had posted again, this time a formal landscape safety alert, with attached PDFs showing staged photos of the site. One included a measuring tape placed deliberately across a depression in the earth. Another showed a close-up of the urn's ceremonial cover, labeled "Foreign Object." There were no comments allowed. Later, I spotted 2 men in HOA windbreakers driving a golf cart up the path. One held a clipboard, the other had a small handheld scanner. I waited for them at the edge of the fence. "Name?" I asked flatly. "Gentry," said the one with the scanner. "We're with Facilities Oversight." "And who approved this barricade?" "It falls under temporary zoning enforcement, Greenbelt section." "Greenbelt isn't HOA zoned," I replied. "That land is recorded as historical easement per Municipal Preservation Clause 42C. They hesitated. "You can check with county archives," I continued, "or the public assessor's office, or, even better, I can send you the digital overlay." The one with the clipboard shifted uncomfortably. "We were just told to assess and report structural hazards." "There is no structure," I said. "There is a grave, marked, documented, registered, and now desecrated." He swallowed and nodded. We'll note your concerns. You do that. They left within 5 minutes, scanning nothing. I called the county's Heritage Liaison office that evening, left 2 voicemails, sent an email, attached photos, the original survey map, and Darrow's CAD overlays. I even included the footage from my drone's flight path that had logged thermal data the day of the burial, heat signatures, timestamps, GPS-coordinated logs. It wasn't enough to file a complaint. I needed jurisdictional leverage, something that took the authority out of Sharon's hands entirely. At 11:47 p.m., the auto-reply came through. We acknowledge receipt of your submission. A preservation officer will be assigned for formal inquiry within 5 business days. It would have to be enough. The next morning, my Can's urn wasn't visible anymore. Someone had moved the ceremonial stones. They hadn't taken them, just pushed them to the edge of the fence line, like clutter, like debris. The hexstone itself was untouched, but the soil around it had fresh boot prints. Deep, heavy ones, like someone had paced back and forth for hours. My hands clenched before I realized it. Every archaeological instinct in me screamed violation. This wasn't an oversight, it was escalation. I drove straight to the county municipal building, walked through metal detectors, and handed over a sealed packet to the preservation desk clerk. "This is a formal notification of site tampering on heritage-protected land," I said. "I want to log it for evidentiary review." The clerk barely looked up. "You'll need to speak with the site officer assigned." "She hasn't been assigned yet, but she will, and when she does, I want this on file." He stamped the envelope and nodded. "Logged." I left without waiting for a call. That night, I didn't sleep. I just stared at the blinking red light on the drone docked beside my window, its footage already backed up, time-stamped, and ready. Because she was still pushing, and I was done standing still. It started with a name buried in the footer of a zoning schematic. I'd seen the file before, Darrow's CAD export, the one he handed me at the clubhouse. I'd scanned it for overlays, parcel boundaries, the unaltered greenbelt grid. But this time, I zoomed into the metadata. There, in gray text beneath the revision box, was a certification line, digitally notarized by Marla Reeves, PLS, number 84923. That number stopped me cold. I knew the format. PLS stood for Professional Land Surveyor, and that ID meant it was a state-certified submission, one step below the county registrar, which meant one thing. This file wasn't a draft. It was filed, reviewed, digitally certified, and logged into the State Property Records Archive before the HOA even existed. I pulled up the State Preservation Map database, typed in the parcel ID Darrow had annotated, X14H, and cross-referenced it with public zoning records. It was there, not just marked, flagged, Pre-Charter Cultural Heritage Zone, Historical Land Use Designation active, subject to protections under Clause 42C, 42E, and 52B, last reviewed 2009. I read it again, then again slower. Clause 52B. That wasn't just heritage protection, that was desecration enforcement. Under state law, Clause 52B triggers automatic state-level jurisdiction if a known or registered burial site is disturbed without court order, not HOA complaint, not landscaping review. State. That changed everything. I double-checked the overlay. The boundary of Hearthvale Bluff's greenbelt stopped 12 feet short of the hexstone marker. The HOA's own plat map, the version attached to the welcome packet, the same one Sharon waved around every time someone planted lavender outside the approved seasonal rotation, was outdated and non-binding. It wasn't a gray zone. It was mine, and Sharon had just parked on it. I printed everything, mapped it, stamped it with my own license number, still valid under my forensic accreditation. As a registered cultural site consultant, I could issue a preliminary interference report for the State Board of Cultural Oversight. It wasn't legally binding, but it opened the door, and it made me the reporting authority. I spent the next 2 hours drafting the full report. Timestamps, photos, overlay comparisons, CAD notes, thermal footage from the drone, Darrow's first-hand affidavit. I wrote it like I'd write a legal deposition, clinical, structured, sourced. Grief pressed at my throat the entire time, but I didn't let it through. This wasn't just about my son anymore. This was about everything Sharon had tried to erase. When the digital packet was ready, I uploaded it directly to the State Cultural Oversight Portal. Not the HOA, not the county, the state, the highest tier. The confirmation message hit my inbox 23 minutes later. Preliminary interference report received and logged, assigned to officer in charge, Marla Reeves, Enforcement Division, Zoning Preservation Division. I stared at the name. The same woman who certified the original schematic. She hadn't just seen the file, she signed it, digitally and professionally, and now she'd be the one assigned to investigate what Sharon had done. I leaned back from the screen, heart racing, but not from panic, from readiness. This was the shift, the moment the balance tipped. For weeks I'd played defense, dodging notices, responding to threats, tiptoeing around the HOA's smug little fiefdom. But not now. Now I had the law on record, the original map, the state clause, and the investigator who notarized it, stepping back into the picture. All I had to do was wait. The next morning, I received a phone call from a blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. It was her, Marla, calm, even-voiced. Dr. Marston, this is Officer Marla Reeves with the State Zoning Preservation Division. I've been assigned to your report regarding Parcel X14H. I'll be arriving on site for an unannounced assessment within 72 hours. Please do not disturb or alter the area further. I'll follow up directly once the inspection is complete. No apology, no sympathy, just protocol. By the time Marla Reeves arrived, the fence was gone. A hadn't touched it. Neither had Doro, but someone had come in the night and stripped every post, every zip tie, every inch of mesh. The plastic was gone. Even the compliance review sign had vanished. All that remained were 4 holes in the ground and the subtle tire marks of a small cart or truck. Thin, narrow treads like the kind the HOA's maintenance crew used. It wasn't mercy, it was erasure. Sharon was trying to hide the evidence before the state could see it, but she was too late. Marla showed up in a forest green utility SUV with an embossed seal on the door. State Zoning Preservation Division. No fanfare, no escort. She stepped out in boots, clipboard in hand, long braid over her shoulder, and nodded once when she saw me. Dr. Marston? Yes. I'm here for a visual inspection and heritage perimeter confirmation. You submitted the interference packet? I did. You signed the original CAD. She blinked at that. Didn't realize this would circle back. I didn't reply, just watched as she moved toward the hex stone, walking slowly, scanning the ground with a practiced eye. She paused beside the disturbed earth, kneeling carefully, brushing a gloved hand over the soil. Her touch was light, but deliberate. There were stones here? She asked. I pointed. 6 ceremonial markers. They were repositioned after fencing was installed. She glanced up. And you didn't move them? No. She stood, scanned the area again, then retrieved a slim digital meter from her pack and held it over the ground. Infrared memory still shows displacement. Moderate compression depth, definitely not animal. She made a few notes. Vehicle impact? SUV, I said. Front tires cleared the hex stone by less than a foot. Recorded? Yes. Drone footage, real-time telemetry. She nodded. We'll need the files. They're already in your system. Submission ID 372 Delta. Marla looked at me for the first time, without the veil of procedural neutrality. Not sympathy, not quite, just recognition. The kind you get from someone who's seen too many maps redrawn over bones. She parked on your son's grave. It wasn't a question. She did, I said. There was silence after that, heavy and precise. She didn't say sorry, didn't need to. Instead, she pulled a reflective tag from her case and walked to the hex stone. With a practiced motion, she drove it into the soil just behind the marker, an aluminum stake with a green band and white letters. State Protected Site. Do not disturb. That changed everything. From that moment forward, the burial zone was no longer under community review. It was under state lock. She turned to me. I'll file a formal interference report with our legal division by end of day. You'll receive a copy. If the HOA attempts contact or removal again, direct them to our enforcement office. I'll authorize jurisdictional freeze under Clause S52B. And the violation notice they posted? She raised an eyebrow. They filed that as an internal landscaping infraction, correct? Yes. Then they've issued a civil threat over state property. What happens next? That depends. She clicked her pen closed. On whether they knew. They knew, I said. I told them, in person, more than once. Marla studied me, then folded her notes and stepped back to her vehicle. I'll be in touch. Until then, you're protected. She left without another word. An hour later, I heard shouting from across the cul-de-sac. Sharon was standing in her driveway, phone pressed to her ear, pacing like a caged wolf. Her voice rose high enough to carry. They can't just override our board authority. That greenbelt's in our plan. No, I don't care what overlay they cited. If they think they can pull state jurisdiction over a patch of dirt. She turned and caught sight of the aluminum stake. The moment her eyes locked on that reflective green band, her voice stopped. She hung up. I didn't wave, didn't speak. I just stood behind my front window and watched the expression melt off her face. She looked like someone realizing, for the first time, that she wasn't in control anymore. Daryl showed up that night with a manila envelope in his hands and regret all over his face. He didn't call ahead, just knocked twice on my front door like he had a weight behind each fist. When I opened it, he didn't say hello. He didn't offer a smile. He just stepped inside when I nodded and set the envelope down on my dining table like it might go off if handled wrong. She's been rewriting records, he said, digitally, quietly. He sat down before I could ask anything. After the inspection today, Sharon panicked. She called an emergency executive session. No minutes, no invites. She told the board the state marker was a mistake. Temporary misclassification, she said. Claimed the land wasn't registered properly and that we had 24 hours to reassert visual jurisdiction. She's bluffing? I know that, but 3 of the others don't, and she's using that fear. She pulled out a modified version of the original CAD, Darrow's CAD, except she'd cut out the zone overlays, removed the state registration tags, flattened the boundary lines, said it was the corrected version. I felt the heat rise behind my eyes. She's tampering with historical records? Digitally, no hard prints, she's careful. Keeps it all internal, back to her HOA device. But I've been watching. He pushed the envelope toward me. These are the original schematics, printed and notarized, dated 2008. I found them in the HOA records vault. She must have forgotten they existed. And more than that, look here. He opened the flap and pulled out a folded document. Yellowed, brittle on the edges, but the stamp in the top corner was unmistakable, county clerk seal, official filing copy. She never refiled the revision, he said. The version she showed the board, it was never submitted. No date stamp, no certifying signature. She's been bluffing with an internal copy and hoping no one checks the clerk's index. I leaned in closer, fingers resting on the page like it might vanish. She's about to lose her grip, he added. And what about you? I'm resigning after this, he said. I should have said something months ago, before she parked that car, before she dragged you through this circus. But I was weak. You weren't weak, I said. You were afraid. He nodded once. I still am. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a flash drive. Everything on here matches the physical prints, overlay files, zoning certificates, a folder of internal emails where she refers to the burial as a decorative obstacle. I closed my hand around it. I already sent a copy to the state investigator, he added, and one to a local news affiliate. That made me look up. Tessa Hale, he said. She's been covering the HOA conflict out of Eastfield. She knows what these board games cost people, and she's already reached out for comment. Sharon's refusing. The silence between us tightened. I broke it first. Why now? Daryl looked past me toward the front window, where the light from the hexstone marker reflected faintly against the glass. Because she stepped on something sacred, he said. And I couldn't be the guy who watched it happen twice. He stood to leave, slower now. Older than he looked last week. At the door, he paused. When she finds out I leaked this, she'll bury me. Not in the ground. In paperwork, defamation, whatever she can twist. She'll try, I said. He met my eyes. You'd better be ready. I am. As he stepped off the porch, I noticed something folded in the envelope he left behind. I pulled it free. A small photo, black and white, glossy. A surveyor crew from years ago, lined up in front of a freshly dug boundary trench. Darrow was in the middle, so was the hexstone. Before the turf, before the HOA, before the lies. I placed the photo beside my laptop and opened the drive. This wasn't just leverage, it was proof. By morning, I had everything organized. 3 drives, 2 printed packets, 1 plan. It wasn't flashy, no dramatic reveal, no social media ambush. That wasn't how you won wars like this. You use structure, timing, bureaucracy. I'd spent half my career inside zoning disputes and land use hearings. I knew the rhythm of these things, slow, precise, and surgical. I started with the State Preservation Office. Marla Reeves already had my original interference report. Now I sent her the notarized schematics from Daryl, the original filing stamped by the county clerk, the unaltered overlay exports, and a screenshot from Sharon's forged version. I didn't add commentary. I didn't need to. The metadata spoke louder than outrage ever could. Next was the county registrar's office. I submitted a request for a public hearing under Land Easement Conflict Clause 8A, citing evidence of intentional boundary tampering by a private governance entity. It was dry legal language, but behind it was blood. I attached the drone footage again, labeled, time-stamped, paired with a 3D render overlay of tire tracks across Mycan's burial site. Then came the HOA. I didn't send it to Sharon directly. I sent it to every board member individually, hard copies and email, each one packaged with the original CAD and the certified overlay from Marla's office. The subject line was simple. Pending state hearing, easement violation, notice for board review. Within an hour, 2 of them responded. One thanked me for the documentation. The other said he was unaware of conflicting filings and would be reviewing legal exposure. Legal exposure. That was the crack I was waiting for. Sharon didn't know yet, but the board was splintering, not out of morality, out of self-preservation. If the HOA was found to have falsified property lines to suppress a state-protected burial site, the liability would fall on each voting member. Civil penalties, possible criminal inquiry, insurance audits. That wasn't a slap on the wrist. That was the kind of fallout that burned entire charters down. I needed one more layer, independent corroboration. I called in a contact, Eleanor Hayes, a preservation law consultant I'd worked with during a dispute upstate 5 years ago. She owed me a favor. I didn't explain everything, just gave her the packet, the timeline, the overlays, and the photos. I asked her for a pre-hearing opinion letter, a legal summary declaring the HOA's jurisdiction invalidated by Clause 42E and 52B, with the reinforced argument that Marla's field tag cemented state-level oversight. She had it to me in less than a day. While she drafted, I called the media, not the nightly news, not the tabloid stations. I went straight to Tessa Hale, the same reporter Daryl had mentioned. She'd built her reputation on exposing HOA corruption throughout the region, predatory fines, manipulated landscaping codes, even illegal surveillance. She picked up on the first ring. "I've been expecting your call," she said. I gave her everything. She barely spoke, just asked questions, clean, sharp, professional. When she heard about the drone footage, she paused. "Can I view it?" "Yes, but I want the hearing to happen first." "Then let me know the date. I'll be there." By that evening, my living room looked like a war room. Stacks of exhibits, labeled folders, heat-mapped aerial photos. I printed copies of everything and backed it all up 3 ways: local, cloud, and encrypted archive. I wasn't going to be caught scrambling. The final step was the petition. Technically, the HOA board could be dissolved or frozen by a 60% vote of homeowners if a formal hearing deemed the governing body in violation of community ethics or external law. Daryl provided the template. I rewrote it, cleaned the language, made it legally sharp. Then I started canvassing, door by door. Not everyone opened, not everyone signed. But enough did. Some nodded in quiet shame. Others hadn't even known a burial had happened. They'd only seen the HOA notices, the buzzwords, visual disturbance, non-compliance, potential safety risk. But when I showed them the footage, just a frame or 2 of Sharon's SUV on sacred ground, they didn't need more. They signed. By the end of the week, I had 41 signatures. I only needed 38. The hearing date landed like a dropped gavel. Monday, 10:30 a.m., County Administrative Building, room 203. I received the confirmation email late Friday afternoon. No preamble, just an official docket number, the list of parties summoned, and a reminder. All supporting materials must be submitted no later than 24 hours prior. Sharon's name was listed under respondent. The HOA board had 72 hours to review the evidence packet now entered into the public record. Illegal boundary redrafting, desecration of a state-recognized site, and administrative abuse of authority. But I didn't wait for the clock to run out. Saturday morning, I set up a table outside the Hearthvale Bluffs Community Center, the same pristine building where the board hosted wine tastings, holiday raffles, and every last compliance forum they used to shame residents into conformity. My table wasn't pretty, just a folding surface, a cheap sign that read "Zoning Truth Matters," and a single-mounted screen looping silent footage. Sharon's SUV easing over the hex stone, her heel stepping out of the driver's side, then the wide-angle shot of the mourners frozen around her. No narration, no sound, just raw facts. The first hour, no one approached. I didn't wave anyone over. I let the footage speak. Then a man from Redwood Lane came by. Didn't say a word, just watched the screen. After a minute, he nodded and picked up one of the hearing notice flyers I'd printed. "Didn't know this was real," he said quietly. "Thought it was HOA drama." "It's real," I said. He was 17. He swallowed and walked off. By noon, I had a small crowd, not angry, not loud, but present. Neighbors who'd stayed silent after the orange fencing. People who'd ignored the burial, thinking it was some eccentric landscaping choice. Others who remembered Mike Ann remembered me pushing him in his wheelchair around the walking path last spring when the cherry trees had bloomed. That's when the whispers started. "Did you see the footage? She really parked on it? Isn't that a state-tagged zone?" Sharon arrived an hour later in her usual armor, heels, scarf, sunglasses large enough to double as a shield. She stood at the edge of the walkway and stared at the screen like it had insulted her. I didn't speak, just pressed a button to rewind and replay. Her lip curled. She turned and walked away without saying a word. That night, Daryl called me. "She's planning a countersuit," he said. "Defamation? She's claiming you falsified the overlay to create manufactured outrage." I didn't even flinch. I expected as much. "She's also trying to call an emergency board vote to suspend your homeowner access to HOA channels. Claims you're distributing unauthorized media on private property. She'll lose, I know, but she's spiraling." I looked at the screen again, paused on the moment she pointed toward the grave and laughed, her teeth bared mid-word. That still frame could have been mistaken for a promotional image in another life, but not this one. This one, it was evidence. "Has the media responded?" I asked. "Tessa confirmed she'll be at the hearing. She's requested to live stream with state approval." "Good." Daryl hesitated, then said, "You ready for this?" "I've been ready since the day she crushed the soil over my son's bones." Sunday night, I finalized the presentation. Not just documents, I built a full chronological exhibit, maps, footage, email headers, sworn testimony, and a statement from Eleanor Hayes summarizing the chain of authority violations in plain terms. Then I printed one last photo, Mike Ann at the Hexstone, taken a month before he passed. He'd insisted on going, even when the nurse said he wouldn't make the walk. I pushed the chair. He touched the stone with both hands and smiled like it meant something I'd never fully understand. I framed it. Not for the courtroom, for me. Because win or lose, I was walking in there with truth on my side and my son's legacy beneath my feet. The courtroom wasn't large, but it felt heavier than any lecture hall I'd ever stood in. Rows of wood-paneled benches, a muted state seal above the judge's bench, 2 flags, 1 county, 1 state, flanking the room like sentinels. A single camera mounted in the corner, red light blinking, broadcasting live under approved press motion. Tessa Hale sat in the gallery's front row, pen poised, her notebook already open. Sharon entered with 2 attorneys, no board members, no support. Just her, in a navy dress and pearls, acting like the victim in someone else's tragedy. Her lawyers looked sharp and annoyed. Probably brought in late, probably promised it was all a simple boundary dispute. She didn't even look at me. I sat across the aisle next to Marla Reeves and Eleanor Hayes with my file case resting upright beside my foot. Everything was printed twice, chronologically tabbed, each map laminated, every video embedded with timestamps and a QR code for the court to scan. The judge entered. Honorable Sylvia Benton, calm, deliberate, gray braid coiled behind her shoulder. She read the docket aloud. Item 4C, Marston v. Hearthvale Bluffs Homeowners Association. State zoning complaint under clauses 42C, 42E, and 52B. Proceedings begin now. She gestured. Dr. Marston, you have the floor. I stood, calm, heart steady. I didn't speak like a grieving father. I spoke like a professional. I presented the parcel overlays, the 2008 stamped survey, the CAD schematics, and the notarized documents. I showed the registered clause from the county registrar's records. I introduced the drone footage, not dramatic, just the facts. Where her SUV parked, where the hex-stone stood, how close the tire crept to the soil. Then I paused, held up the final exhibit. A single photo of the state preservation tag Marla had staked beside the grave. Your Honor, I said, this is no longer a community dispute. This is state-registered sacred ground, and the HOA board, led by Ms. Vosberg, willfully ignored that status after repeated notices. They took hostile action against a burial site, publicly misrepresented its zoning, and manipulated internal documents to conceal the violation. I sat down. Marla presented next. She detailed the inspection, the soil compaction, the visual evidence, the disappearance of the orange fencing, and the tampered ceremonial stones. Eleanor followed with a summary of jurisdictional limits. Her voice never rose above conversational volume, but every sentence struck like a hammer. And then it was Sharon's turn. She rose slowly, head tilted, voice low and sugar slick. We weren't aware the site was officially registered at the time, she said. We acted in good faith under the belief that this was community-maintained greenbelt. Our intention was never to desecrate, only to enforce uniformity and safety in a shared space. The judge stared at her for a long second. And the footage of you stepping out of your vehicle, parking across the burial zone? Sharon's attorney leaned in and whispered. She recovered. I believed it to be unoccupied at that moment. And the email to the board, referring to the grave as a decorative obstacle? Sharon blinked. Her lawyer interrupted. Objection, Your Honor. That email was not authenticated. Overruled, the judge said. It's part of the verified discovery packet and was matched against the HOA's internal timestamp logs. A hush fell across the courtroom. Then the judge looked down, shuffled the papers slowly, then turned her eyes to Sharon one last time. This is not a zoning oversight. It is a coordinated abuse of administrative power with the explicit aim of erasing a legally protected site. She nodded to the clerk. Under Clause 52B, jurisdiction is hereby transferred to the State Preservation Authority, the Hearthvale Bluffs. HOA is ordered to cease all activities related to Parcel X Fiorni H. Additionally, Ms. Sharon Vosberg is found liable for willful desecration of protected heritage land and obstruction of historical registry documentation. Sharon's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The judge continued. Sentencing will follow. For now, Ms. Vosberg is remanded to custody pending review. Bail is denied due to risk of tampering. There was no applause, no gasps, just a silence so sharp it felt like glass. They cuffed her in front of the state flag, not roughly, not theatrically, just procedure. A quiet clink of metal on wrist, the marbled echo of her heels as the bailiff led her past the gallery toward the side exit. She didn't look back, didn't plead. Her expression wasn't shame. It was confusion, like someone who'd misread the rules of a game and couldn't understand why she'd lost. The judge rose. The gavel struck once. Court is adjourned. Tessa Hale was already scribbling. I didn't move, not at first. My hands were still wrapped around the photo I'd kept flat in my lap. Mycan, smiling at the hexstone, the sun high behind him. I stared at that moment for a long beat before standing, letting the weight of it guide my spine upright. Outside the courthouse, a cluster of neighbors waited. I hadn't asked them to come, but they did. A few from Redwood, one from Alderway, even the couple who used to cross the street to avoid walking past the grave. No one said anything at first. Then one of them, a woman in a forest green windbreaker, stepped forward. I didn't know her name. She held out a folded piece of paper. I added my signature to the petition, she said. I should have done it earlier. I took it. Thank you. Another man nodded toward the steps. What happens now? Now the state retained jurisdiction over the site indefinitely. Now the HOA's authority was frozen pending review by the Charter Committee. Now the board members who had blindly signed off on Sharon's violations would be subject to compliance audits and public disclosure. And Sharon? She was facing a Class D felony under our state's heritage preservation law, rarely enforced, but very real. The prosecutor had announced plans to pursue the maximum charge, given the deliberate and documented desecration. The footage, the emails, the altered schematics, they were undeniable. I turned toward the group. "The land is protected now," I said. "No one touches it again." A few of them nodded, others just watched, quiet. There was no celebration, no cheering, just a shift, like something old and rotted had been pulled from beneath the floorboards. And now the air was beginning to clear. Daryl approached last. He wore a plain gray jacket and held his own copy of the court's ruling, folded neatly, unread. "They're already calling an emergency vote to restructure the board," he said. 3 members resigned before lunch. "Are you staying?" He hesitated. "If I leave now, they'll fill it with another puppet. If I stay, I can rewrite the charter clauses. Make sure nothing like this happens again." "Then stay," I said. "Make it count." He looked me in the eye. "It already does." We stood there a while. The wind picked up. Leaves stirred near the base of the courthouse steps. Somewhere behind us, a news van's engine kicked to life, and Tessa's voice floated from a mic, calm and clear. "In a landmark ruling today, the State Preservation Office has confirmed oversight of the disputed burial site, marking a rare but decisive rejection of overreaching HOA power." I walked home alone. When I reached my driveway, the drone was waiting, still docked in its cradle by the second-story window. I lifted it carefully, wiped down the lens, and stored it in the case I'd nearly buried it in months ago. Then I stepped into the backyard. The hex stone stood exactly where it always had, framed now by low garden lights and a freshly placed bronze marker ordered by the Preservation Board. Protected Cultural Site. Parcel X14H. I knelt beside it. The ground was undisturbed, clean. The ceremonial stones had been replaced, not by me, but by someone else. Maybe Daryl, maybe one of the neighbors, maybe a stranger who understood the weight of what had happened here. I reached forward and touched the hex stone, not with grief, with promise. Then I said his name aloud, just once. "Mikan." No one heard me, but I wasn't saying it for them. The sentence came down exactly 1 week after the hearing. 10 years, 4 to be served in state custody, 6 suspended under strict probation, contingent on restitution payments, and a permanent bar from any HOA or governance position in the state. The courtroom was half full when the ruling was read. No camera crews this time, just quiet observers and 2 county officials from zoning. Sharon stood in the same navy dress, but the pearls were gone, and the smirk that once seemed etched into her face had vanished entirely. When the judge read the final line, "On the charge of desecration of protected burial grounds under Clause 52B, Sharon didn't flinch. She just nodded, like she finally believed it, like she understood she'd really lost. Afterward, I didn't linger. I didn't need to. The state had already begun restructuring oversight of Hearthvale Bluffs. The board was dissolved within 72 hours of the sentencing, pending charter overhaul. Daryl had been appointed interim trustee by unanimous vote. He asked me to help rewrite the land governance section, specifically to add a permanent protection and cultural respect clause modeled after Clause 42E. I agreed. 2 weeks later, we held a dedication ceremony at the Hexstone. It wasn't large, no speeches, no microphones, just a semicircle of neighbors, a representative from the Preservation Division, and a simple bronze plaque mounted into the soil at the base of the stone. In memory of Mikan R. Marston, sun, soul, light, and in honor of all who sleep beneath this ground. I didn't say anything that day. I didn't need to. The land spoke loud enough. A few nights after the ceremony, I returned to the site alone. The sun was low, casting amber bands across the grass. The wind stirred just enough to move the leaves, and the light from the path caught on the aluminum preservation tag still embedded near the marker. I sat at the edge of the garden, not to mourn, to remember. I remembered how Mikan had once asked me, half teasing, half serious, if I believed in ghosts. I'd told him no, that people weren't haunted, land was. Memory lived in soil and stone, not shadows. He'd grinned and said, "Then bury me in the memory place." That's what he called the hex stone, the memory place. And now it would remain just that, untouched, undisturbed, watched over not by homeowners with rule books, but by the law, and by everyone who now understood what lines should never be crossed. The fight was never about revenge. It was about silence, about the silence that comes when grief is desecrated, when memory is labeled a violation, when mourning is met with fences and fines. But not anymore. Sharon's conviction didn't just protect the land, it set a precedent. The Preservation Board issued a policy revision requiring all new HOA charters to cross-reference state heritage maps before claiming control of Greenbelt property. Other neighborhoods began filing requests for boundary reviews. What started as a local fight became something wider, something lasting. And in that, there was peace. There is something I need you to take from this. No matter how rigid the structure, no matter how loud the officials, no matter how deep the injustice feels, there are laws older than paper and louder than power. And when you know where the bones are buried, when you honor the truth carved into land, you don't just win, you preserve. If you've ever lived in a community where someone tried to weaponize rules against legacy, against loss, against dignity, share this story. Tell someone what happened here. Speak for the ones who were silenced. And if this story meant something to you, subscribe now. Because the next time they try to bury the truth, we'll be ready to dig it back up.